Hey, everybody, welcome back. We're doing a deep dive today into Vice President Kamala Harris's interview on Fox News with Bret Baier.
Oh, yeah, this one should be good.
Yeah, you guys sent this one in and specifically wanted to know, did she answer his questions directly? Was Baier playing fair? And ultimately, will this interview help or hurt her campaign? So many questions.
It's going to be fascinating to break it down. It's a Fox News interview with a Democratic VP during a heated election.
Yeah, talk about a recipe for fireworks.
Right. There's going to be some strategic maneuvering on both sides, for sure. It's like watching a political chess match.
I like that analogy, a political chess match.
Oh.
All right, so let's jump right in. The first major point of contention was immigration right. Baier went straight for this hot-button issue.
He did. He really did. He kept pushing Harris for specific numbers on illegal immigrants released under the Biden administration.
Yeah, he kept asking if the number was closer to 1 million or 3 million.
It's a classic tactic trying to box her in and force a specific answer.
Yeah.
You know, one that could be potentially damaging.
Right. So how did she handle that? Did she give him the numbers he wanted?
Well, she initially sidestepped it. She pivoted instead to talking about the need for immigration system repair.
Okay, so let's hear that clip.
Let's hear it.
Okay, here's Harris.
Here we go.
The point is that we have a broken immigration system that needs to be repaired. So she acknowledged the issue, but didn't give those specific numbers. So smart move or dodging the question.
Well, it could be both, right? I mean, that kind of deflection is common in political interviews.
Yeah.
It lets candidates address a broader issue without getting pinned down by statistics.
Right.
But some voters might see it as evasive, especially if they're looking for concrete answers and accountability. What do you think?
I could see both sides.
Yeah.
But Baier didn't let up, did he? He brought up specific cases of crimes committed by individuals released under the administration's policies.
Right. He really wanted to make it personal. Tie it to real-world consequences. You know, he mentioned Jocelyn Nungaray, Rachel Morin, Laken Riley, all tragic cases.
Yeah, and he used those cases to push for accountability from the administration.
He did. How did Harris respond to that?
It's interesting. She expressed sympathy for the victims' families, which is definitely crucial in situations like this.
Of course.
But then she kind of shifted the focus back to broader solutions and the need for bipartisan efforts on immigration reform.
So acknowledging the pain caused, but still advocating for her broader approach.
Exactly. It's a tricky balance to strike.
Right.
Showing empathy, but also sticking to the policy talking points.
Definitely. So did she strike the right balance? What do you think?
It's tough to say. Let's hear how she responded when she was directly confronted with the mother of one of the victims.
Okay. Yeah, this is a powerful moment.
There we go.
Right.
I will tell you that I am so sorry for her loss. I'm so sorry for her loss, sincerely. But let's talk about what is happening right now with an individual who does not want to participate in solutions. Let's talk about that as well, Bret.
Wow, you can really hear the emotion in her voice there.
You can. But was it enough, to satisfy those who are looking for more than just words?
Yeah, that's a question, isn't it? Was it genuine empathy or a way to avoid directly answering the question about accountability?
Tough one for voters to unpack.
It is. And it's something for all of us to think about as we're analyzing this interview, right?
Absolutely. Now, Baier didn't stop there. He also brought up some of Harris's past statements on immigration, particularly from her 2019 presidential run.
Oh, yeah, he went there. He pointed out some perceived shifts in her position.
He did. Remember when he mentioned her previous support for allowing undocumented immigrants to apply for driver's licenses and qualify for free tuition and even be enrolled in free health care?
Yeah, he brought up all of that. And that's when things get really interesting, right? Because he's using her past statements to highlight inconsistencies.
Yeah.
And to raise questions about whether her stance has changed.
Right. It's a classic tactic to cast doubt on a candidate's authenticity.
It is. So how did Harris respond to this? Did she address those perceived shifts head on?
Well, she tried to distance herself from those past statements, framing them as belonging to a different time and context.
Interesting. A common strategy.
Yeah, for sure. So let's hear how she explained it.
Okay.
Here she is.
Here we go.
Listen, that was 5 years ago. And I'm very clear that I will follow the law. I have made that statement over and over again. And as Vice President of the United States, that's exactly what I've done, not to mention before. So she's basically saying that was then, this is now.
Right.
Yeah.
But is that enough? Will voters be satisfied with that?
It's hard to know, right? I mean, did she adequately explain those shifts? Or will this just fuel concerns about her consistency and authenticity?
Yeah, it's definitely something for voters to think about.
Absolutely. These are the kind of questions that can really influence how people vote.
For sure. So did she successfully navigate this tricky part of the interview? Or did Baier's questioning expose a vulnerability?
Tough to say. But before we move on to the next segment of the interview, I want to pause here for a sec and ask you, our listener, what you think so far. Do you think Harris effectively addressed those tough questions on immigration?
Yeah, let us know your thoughts. We'll be back in a minute to dig into the rest of the interview. It's going to be really interesting to see how all of this plays out in the polls. But for now, let's move on to the next part of this interview. Baier didn't stay focused on immigration the whole time. He shifted gears to the economy.
He did.
Yeah.
And specifically to Harris's campaign slogan, "A New Way Forward."
Right, and that's where he kind of used a little bit of irony, pointing out that she's calling for turning the page while she's been part of the current administration for over 3 years.
Right. He was like, wait a minute, you're calling for change, but you've been in office for years.
Yeah, exactly. He even brought up some polling data stating that over 70% of Americans believe the country is on the wrong track.
I remember that. He definitely used that to challenge her.
He did. He even said, and I'm quoting here, more than 70% of people tell pollsters the country is on the wrong track. If you're turning the page, you've been in office for 3.5 years.
Yeah, he basically called her out on it.
He did. So how did Harris respond to this tough line of questioning?
Well, she did what many politicians do in these situations. She deflected blame.
Ah, the classic deflection.
Right. She pivoted away from the current administration's record and focused on, you guessed it, Trump.
Of course, got to bring up Trump.
Right. She talked about his rhetoric and his policies and basically argued that her presidency would be a clean break from the past.
Okay, so classic strategy, but does it work?
It's tough to say. It really depends on who's listening, right?
Yeah, for sure. For those who already support Harris, it might reinforce their belief that the previous administration is to blame for the current economic problems.
Right. But for those who are undecided or maybe even critical of the current administration, it might come across as avoiding responsibility.
Exactly. So it's a gamble. But Baier didn't let her off easy. He pressed her further and asked if she would have done anything differently than Biden.
Oh, that's a tough question.
It is. It's a really tricky situation for a sitting VP running for president.
Right, because she has to differentiate herself from the current president, but also maintain party unity.
Exactly. She can't throw Biden under the bus, but she also has to convince voters that she's offering something new.
Right. So how did she navigate that tightrope?
Carefully. She tried to thread the needle by saying that her presidency wouldn't be a continuation of Biden's, but would bring fresh and new ideas.
That's subtle. Did she actually criticize Biden?
Not directly. It was more like a gentle suggestion of a departure.
Okay, let's hear that clip.
Okay, here it is.
My presidency will not be a continuation of Joe Biden's presidency.
So she's drawing a distinction, but is it clear enough?
Yeah, will voters buy it?
That's the question, isn't it? It's a risky move because it could alienate Biden's supporters while not convincing those who want a more radical change.
Right. It's a tough balancing act, for sure. Okay, so let's move on to another potentially challenging topic, foreign policy.
Okay.
And specifically Harris's statement that Iran poses the greatest threat to the U.S.
Oh, yeah, this one raised some eyebrows.
It did, because a lot of experts see China as the primary adversary.
Right, and of course Baier picked up on this.
He did. He brought up the potential relaxation of sanctions on Iran and even mentioned funding flows and argued that those actions don't exactly scream, Iran is our biggest threat.
Yeah.
So how did Harris defend her position?
Well, instead of directly addressing those points, she pivoted back to Trump.
Ah, back to Trump.
Always. She criticized his decision to pull out of the Iran nuclear deal. And she also brought up the attack on the U.S. military base during Trump's presidency.
Right. And how he downplayed the injuries sustained by American soldiers.
Exactly. Let's hear that part.
Okay.
Here it is.
But let's go back to Donald Trump, who pulled out of a deal that would actually put Iran in check.
Right.
And then it was during Donald Trump's administration that Iran in May, that we had an American military base that was attacked, where American soldiers suffered traumatic brain injuries, and Donald Trump dismissed them as headaches. Not to mention how Donald Trump has treated and talked about America's military and military service people, calling them suckers and losers.
So there you have it. Back to Trump.
Right. But does that really answer Baier's question? Does talking about Trump justify her current stance on Iran?
It's up for debate, right? It raises some interesting questions about whether she adequately addressed the concerns about the current administration's approach to Iran.
Right. Is bringing up Trump just a way to deflect, or is it a legitimate argument?
Something for everyone to consider.
Okay, so let's zoom out a little and talk about the big picture. We've analyzed some key moments from this interview. We looked at Harris's answers to tough questions on immigration, the economy, and even foreign policy. But what does it all mean for her campaign? Did she come out ahead? Will this interview ultimately help or hurt her chances in the election?
It's really hard to say. She definitely stood her ground against Baier. I mean, he's a tough interviewer, but she held her own.
She didn't back down from those tough questions, that's for sure.
Yeah.
And she was good at steering the conversation, kind of bringing it back to her main points.
Right, she did. But will that work with voters? Who knows?
Yeah, it's all about perception, right?
It is. Some people will see her as strong and composed, and others might think she's being evasive or even disingenuous.
It all depends on where you're coming from politically.
Exactly. Some voters will appreciate her focus on policy and how she tries to draw that contrast with the previous administration.
Yep.
But others might want more specific answers,
They want to see accountability.
Right. So it really boils down to individual voters and what they're looking for.
So back to our original question. Will this interview help or hurt her in the election?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's impossible to say for sure.
Yeah.
Political interviews are tricky. You never know what kind of impact they'll have.
True. But at least this interview got people talking.
Yeah.
It gave voters a chance to see Harris under pressure.
That's a good point. And in a democracy, that's valuable in itself.
It is. And, brings us back to something you said earlier about voters needing to think critically.
Oh, yeah, that's so important.
Don't just take things at face value.
Right. Question everything. Consider different perspectives.
Form your own informed opinions. That's how democracy works.
Oh, exactly.
So let's throw it back to you, our listeners. You've heard the clips. You've heard our analysis. Now it's your turn. What do you think? Did Harris answer the questions directly? Was Baier being fair? And most importantly, will this interview help or hurt her campaign? Head over to our social media and tell us what you think.
Yeah, we want to hear from you. And remember, it's okay to disagree. That's what makes for a healthy debate.
Exactly. The important thing is to engage with the issues and with each other.
I couldn't have said it better myself.
So thanks for joining us on this deep dive. As always, it was a fascinating conversation.
It was.
And we'll be back next week with another one. Until then, keep those critical thinking caps on.
And we'll see you soon.
See ya.